So the minutes were correct, but the date was wrong. So the minutes that you have from April, that was the last time we met. Yeah. So we had that truck driving school.
Yes.
I'm nervous for a second there. Like, I swear, I found, because I had to look for those minutes, like, they weren't in the regular spot. Okay. Lisa, can you hear us okay? Can you hear us okay?
I haven't seen you guys in like a year. How are you doing? Well, I know. I see you once in a while.
We cannot hear you. Oh, now I can hear you.
Now you can hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. I'll put myself on mute until you're ready for me.
Okay, thank you.
Roger, how you doing? How are you?
I'm Mariel.
You know, I heard you were Mariel, I heard you were gonna be here. Have we met?
Probably.
Yeah.
Maybe?
Oh, really? Okay. I don't know. Remember.
Me either.
But I heard you were gonna be here and I was happy about that. Well, good. Welcome. Good. It's been a while.
It has. In fact, I think it was the last ones were the Zoom meetings with COVID.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah,
Nice one.
yeah. Well, maybe like last year. Whenever it was remote from here.
Yeah. I think so.
Yeah. I didn't.
It's a long time. I guess we got everybody here. It's gonna be shipping here, right?
Yes, sir.
For September? Oh, we got a half hour. That's what I was thinking. No. Okay, you ready? All the zoning board appeals meetings. By way of introduction, I will briefly explain the purpose of the Board of Appeals to the audience. The city has adopted a set of zoning ordinance if a property owner applicant wishes relief for a portion of the ordinance. State law provides for an avenue of appeal, hence named Zoning Board of Appeals. The zoning board must find that 4 conditions exist in reviewing an application in order to grant the variance. If all 4 conditions are met, the board can't grant a approval for a variance from the ordinance. The 4 conditions that must be met are: 1, extraordinary or exceptional circumstances which apply to this parcel alone. 2, preservation of rights that a similar zoned parcel would have. 3, no detriment to adjacent properties. The request is not in such a general nature that the ordinance should be changed. Unlike a decision by the Planning Commission that must be approved or can be overturned by the City Commission, the decision by the Zoning Board of Appeals is final. There is no review or opportunity for overturning by the City Commission. Zoning Enabling Act provides a section 606, appendix 3, an appeal from a decision of the Zoning Board of Appeals shall be filed within 30 days after the Zoning Board of Appeals issues its decision in writing, signed by the chairperson, if there is a chairperson, or signed by the members of the Zoning Board of Appeals, if there is no chairperson, or within 21 days after the Zoning Board of Appeals approve the minutes of its decision. The court may affirm, reverse, or modify the decision of the Zoning Board of Appeals. The court may make other orders as justice requires. Okay. $16.43. We're gonna go into minutes first. We got our date here. Everybody got the date right? We gotta go 4/27/22 minutes. Need to be approved.
Well, one correction, I
Okay.
think,
All right.
from your conversation, you don't have her listed as present or absent here for that date.
Say that again?
Okay,
Oh, yeah, you're right.
yeah, she's totally omitted from she's not present or absent for that meeting.
But maybe because I'm an alternate.
Right, it's because she's an alternate.
She's an alternate.
Okay.
Rose was there as an alternate, so she
Okay.
shows up under present.
Okay. All right.
I make a motion to approve the meeting minutes as printed.
Okay. A motion to approve the minutes is printed.
I'll support that.
Supported by Pat. All those in favor of approving the minutes signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All same sign, the minutes are approved. We have a section under general comment. The provision is made to encourage the expression of questions and concerns regarding non-public hearing items and issues not on the agenda. Speakers are asked to identify themselves by name and address. A maximum time of 6 minutes per person is required. Okay, are we all set up for the camera and everything? Okay. Oh, okay, go ahead. Sure.
Did you want to ask for general public comment?
Yeah, we can go there right now. I thought I did, but I just read it off. Anybody want to comment anything that's not on the agenda? Any comments about anything or questions? Okay. Okay, we have applicant for 1643 Geddes Avenue, Lisa McAllister. Zoning district is SA suburban residential, single family. Size of the property is 0.38 acres. Type of request, dimensional variance. Relief from section 94-337 KA to allow for a 6-foot privacy fence in a secondary front yard on a corner lot. The applicant is requesting to retain a 6-foot in accordance at 12 foot from the south property line, same location as previous 4-foot fence in a portion of the secondary front yard, as well as in a portion of the rear yard where the ordinance restricts the heights of these areas also to 4 feet. There are exceptional or extraordinary circumstances or conditions applying to this property in question as to the intended use of the property that do not apply generally to other properties in the same zoning district. Applicant's response: the size of our lot and positioning of the house allows for a large setback on the side yard. Such a variance is necessary for the preservation and enjoyment of a substantial property right similar to that possessed by other properties in the same zoning district and in the vicinity. The possibility of increased financial return shall not be in itself be deemed significant to warrant a variance. Applicant's response: the position of our home leaves the backyard very exposed, large length of sidewalk and road traffic. We were unable to enjoy similar privacy to our property, so we installed a privacy fence in place of our existing fence. Modifying the fence line would have endangered our yard and endangered our sprinkling system. Any changes would result in financial burden. See, not authorizing such a variance will not be a substantial detriment to adjacent properties and will not materially impair the intent of the purpose of this character of the public interest. Applicant's response: the adjacent property is also enhanced by the fence. Our immediate neighbors are in full support of the fence, as they would also like more privacy from the road and sidewalk traffic. No other properties are detrimentally impaired by the fence. D, the condition or situation of the piece of property or the intended use of such property for such the variance is sought. It is not in so a general nature or recurrent in nature as to make reasonable, practicable the formulation of a general regulation for such conditions or situations. Applicant's response: this is not a recurrent variance. Okay. Now, these two, do they want to respond to us at all over this?
She's present and the applicant is present
Okay,
on,
okay,
Teams.
okay. All right.
Me? Yes, hi Lisa.
Hi. Hi. Yeah, we did this in good faith, in working with Tricia, to just make our backyard usable, honestly. So, it was our understanding that we would not be cited for this fence in working with Tricia, and it was quite a surprise to go through this process. Now we are just trying to work with you guys to gain the variance based on the grounds listed.
Okay. I'm gonna ask the board if you want any questions ready for the applicant, if you wanna go, or you wanna present some more, Tricia,
Sure.
than this, okay?
Yeah. So, thank you for introducing the item. So this, the property address is 1643 Geddes, and the request is relief from section 94-337-2A to allow for a 6-foot privacy fence in the secondary front yard on a corner lot. So I should mention that the 6-foot privacy fence has been installed in place where the 4-foot fence was previously. So this is a picture of the yard. So the green here represents the front yard. This pink area represents the secondary front yard. So all corner lots have this secondary front yard. Our ordinance is unclear as to the intent of the secondary front yard. I have some ideas, just from a zoning and planning perspective that I've indicated in my report. And then you can see here the yellow area is the rear yard. So just a little bit of background about the property. So the property is zoned SA suburban single family residential. It's 16,552 square feet in size, and that's 0.38 acres. The home was built in 1997, and it's located within the Mullins Meadows number 3 plat. And it's on the corner of Awixa and Geddes. So this is what it looks like currently. And this fence has been replaced by the 6-foot privacy fence. So the previous fence looks like a wrought iron 4-foot fence out there in the secondary front yard, roughly 13 to 14 feet without having a survey. That's what I measured from the aerial photo from the property line. So the site plan, again, if you measure from the property line to the fence area, where that 4-foot fence was existing, it's about 14 feet. So aerial photos can be off by a couple feet, and we don't have a survey from the applicant. So one of my recommendations is if the zoning board is inclined to grant the variance, that it be no closer than 12 feet to the property line. So as you know, we have these 4 criteria that an applicant has to meet in order for a variance to be granted. So the first one being exceptional or extraordinary circumstances. So the question we're asking is, does the property have exceptional or extraordinary circumstances, such as topography or an odd shape or something else weird that's not exhibited by other properties in the general vicinity? The second one is preservation of rights. And so for this one, you're looking at whether other properties of similar size and in the same general vicinity are able to enjoy a 6-foot privacy fence in the rear yard. And whether not granting the variance would deprive the property owner of that substantial property right. The next one is whether it's a detriment. So will the presence of a 6-foot privacy fence in the secondary front yard, roughly 14 feet from the property line, cause a negative impact on the neighboring properties? And then not a general problem. So does this type of request exist often enough to warrant a change in the zoning ordinance to prevent future variance applications? So these are the questions that we're asking ourselves as we're going through these criteria. So I'm just going to go through my analysis of each of these criteria. So the first one, exceptional or extraordinary circumstances. We've been here before and considered granting a variance for a fence in a secondary front yard over on Parkside in my 2.5 years here at Walker. So there was one other instance since I've been here. So in my opinion, corner lots are exceptional just by nature because they have different rules that apply to them. And you probably read my final thoughts in my report regarding how not all corner lots are created equal. And so some corner lots, when you fence off a portion of the rear yard, staying out of that secondary front yard and having the fence line up with the plane of the house, it provides quite a bit of space. But in other circumstances, you find that there's quite a bit of unusable space, and it all depends on where the house is situated. So my opinion is that corner lots are exceptional by nature. So because of that, I believe that criterion has been met. When we talk about preservation of rights, again, I'm going to go back to those examples that I provided to you with how there are plenty of yards out there that are allowed to have a 6-foot privacy fence. But when your lot is a corner lot, you lose, in some circumstances, a significant portion of your yard. And I call it usable versus unusable because generally when you have a fence and you fence in a portion of your yard, that's the portion that you're using because you have a dog or you have kids that you don't want running out into the street. And so generally the unfenced in area doesn't get enjoyed as much as the fenced in area. And so that's why I've given these examples of a couple different types of corner lots throughout the city where you can see, you know, if we apply the ordinance as it's written, you see that a portion of the rear yard is usable, but a big portion is unusable. This is a good example here where only this portion of the rear yard on this corner lot could be fenced in. So that if the fence were to stay in line with the house, this is where the fence would be, making this the usable portion of the yard and this entire area unusable, meaning not fenced in, not enjoying it with your kids or your pets. In this criterion, I also need to mention that the city has granted at least 8 variances that I could find to allow a 6-foot privacy fence under similar circumstances in the secondary front yard in recent years. The records that I've been able to come across go back to 2007. So I would say that's somewhat recent. And I've already stated this, that not all corner lots are created equal. You also have the issue of people who have corner lots in the secondary front yard, and we ran into this in the Chesterfield Heights neighborhood when we considered that request for the secondary front yard fence on Parkside. There's a lot of people that just go cowboy and put up a fence, and it kind of goes under the radar for 25 years, and you know, it's still there. This ordinance has been in effect, I think, for at least that long. So in some of your older neighborhoods where the lots are smaller, there's not as, you know, you're more tightly packed, and you're going to see a lot more fences to create more privacy. So under one of 3 scenarios, you know, somebody just put up a fence on in the secondary front yard on a corner lot without asking if there were any rules, because we don't require a permit to construct a fence. So, you know, sometimes people don't even think to ask, and they see that others have a fence up, so they assume that it would be okay. And that's a pretty typical, you know, way of looking at things. You know, or somebody knew what the rules were and they constructed it anyway, or a variance was granted. So under those 3 circumstances, we got lots of fences in secondary front yards in the city of Walker. So because of those factors, I gotta say that I think that criterion has been met. Not a detriment. So when we look at this one, we want to look at what's the intent of keeping a fence out of the secondary front yard. And if you research some other zoning ordinances that might have some more clear language, you might find that the intent of keeping fences or keeping obstructions or landscaping or other structures out of the secondary front yard is to maintain that clear vision on the corner. And so a lot of ordinances have a radius from this corner, so they have like a no build zone, you know, maybe 30 feet out into the front yard on the corner. So a no build zone would probably be a little bit more appropriate than what we have now. And we've talked about this in the past and how it's time to make the change. We've had that discussion at the last variance request in the secondary front yard. But the other intent that I think the secondary front yard might be for, is to keep homes situated in a uniform fashion. So when you have a house on a corner lot that's facing one street, it's still in line with the rest of the houses that are on the other street. So, you know, whether placing a fence in that area causes detriment to aesthetics, I don't believe it does. And I don't actually think that it's even relevant. So because of those things, I believe that criterion has been met. So not a general problem. This is the one where we kind of get hung up on, do we need to make changes to the zoning ordinance because this is a request that we get so often that, you know, it's time to make the change. Well, we said that at the last one where we granted the variance for that fence on Parkside. And as you know, and Brian's on our zoning ordinance rewrite subcommittee, we've been talking about making this change, but sometimes we have situations that pop up before we get a chance to make the change. And so, you know, because of that, we end up having to go back to the Zoning Board of Appeals for a fence that, you know, is in line with what our vision is, but by law, we have to jump through the appropriate hoops in order to be able to allow the use. And so another thing that kind of came up as I was reviewing this is that, do we really have a good definition of recurrent request? So, you know, like, how do we define, we've had too many requests for this, we should probably change the ordinance. It's not really clearly defined, it's kind of vague. So that would be one change that I would propose to the zoning ordinance, so that we can get a better handle on how appropriate it is to just make a change to the zoning ordinance versus keep hearing variance cases. And so the past variances have already created a precedent, and we have changes to the ordinance that are currently being drafted. So the ordinance language that we have drafted right now, and we ran this past the subcommittee, is that we would allow a fence in the secondary front yard up to 25 feet from the property line. That's what we've talked about. We've also talked about allowing a fence in a 6-foot privacy fence in the secondary front yard, a percentage of that secondary front yard, like so depending on the location of the house, and because not all corner lots are created equal, if we give a percentage to set an appropriate or a scaled setback for the fence, then it would be more to scale with where the house is. So I think we've got that one covered also. So going back to section 94-59, granting of variances requires that all criteria must be met in order for a variance to be granted. And I'm clearly making the recommendation that the zoning board grant this variance for this 6-foot fence in the secondary front yard. Based on the findings that I just went through. And I'm here for any questions.
Okay.
Are you aware that the house directly behind this one was in here for the same variance several years ago?
Yes, I am.
They got denied. But after saying that, at that point, we were upholding the ordinance. And at that time, there was no inclination that the side yard should be relooked at. Because a lot of things in our ordinance are out of date. And nobody at that time wanted to take on this massive issue that you're doing now. If I'm reading what you said right, the new proposal for the side yard ordinance is gonna be a minimum of 25 feet from the property line?
I can't say exactly what it would be because obviously it has to go through the planning commission, but those are just some ideas that we've talked about. You know, we've got a few different opinions within our staff working group, and, you know, there's a little bit of opposition, understandably, for a secondary front yard fence to go all the way to the property line. So we talked about different setbacks from that property line. 25 feet was one that stuck out in my head. But again, when you have all of these secondary front yards that are not the same, that 25 feet might not be a good one-size-fits-all setback.
Well, I think part of it was there were so many variables at the time, back when we were granting these, they felt that it was better to look at them on a case-by-case basis. Two issues came up, and I don't know if the zoning ordinance committee has looked at them. Is in some cases where we did grant variances, we required a minimum of at least 8 foot away from the sidewalk, because Walker's supposed to be a pedestrian-friendly city, and if you've got a fence right on the property line along adjacent to the sidewalk, and people are walking, and the person that lives there happens to have a big dog, it scares you when they come at the fence and start barking, whether they can see you or not. So we allowed a minimum from the sidewalk of at least, I think it was 8 feet, maybe it was 10. Second thing is, and I think it has to go to your last example of usable, unusable, is that if the house adjacent to the side yard faces the side street, the fence cannot come out further than the front plane of that house. So what I'm saying is if that one there, their unusable space would start at the face of the adjacent house. Because you would not let that house run a 6-foot fence from his house out to the road. Because you move it over on the next property 6 inches doesn't make it legal.
I'm a little, I don't know what section of the ordinance you're referring to.
Okay. We can't put a 6-foot fence in a front yard.
Right.
Okay. And what I'm saying is this example here, this front of this house should be the limit for this resident to put in a side yard fence.
I don't know that the ordinance is written in a way to prevent somebody from putting a privacy fence in their backyard when it's somebody's,
This is in the
Front yard.
side yard though. This
But
is
it's-
the ordinance you're looking at.
right.
Okay, would you want to sit in your living room, look out, and see a 6-foot fence along your property line
I guess what I'm
in
saying
your
is,
front yard?
I don't think our ordinance states that fences can't be in a 6-foot privacy fence in one person's backyard is not, like, another person's property doesn't play into that.
Then
I
you're not making the ordinance then neighbor friendly.
Well, I didn't write that
Right,
ordinance.
I know, but what I'm saying is our ordinances need to not only be pedestrian friendly, they need to be neighborly friendly. And it's just like, that's partly why, other than aesthetics of the neighborhood, why everybody doesn't get to put a 6-foot fence in their front yard. Because nobody if the neighbor across the road doesn't want a fence in his front yard, he shouldn't have to look out and see this wooden wall across the street.
There's a couple different views on that, but you're right. I mean, there's a lot of variables when it comes to fences.
And we have put that restriction on people before. When we granted a side yard variance for a fence, is your fence cannot come out in front of the plane of your neighbor's house. Because then you've destroyed the whole idea of having the front of the houses even all the way down the street.
I mean, that's a really good point, Roger, but how do you decide which neighbor should enjoy their property? Who has the most right to enjoy their property?
The neighbor who can enjoy it without interfering with the other neighbors.
But, so, every lot is different. And so, when it comes to fences, it's really hard to find a one-size-fits-all standard. So, I mean, in terms of the criteria and whether or not this applicant is meeting the criteria, I think that's an appropriate conversation. I think what we're talking about is an appropriate conversation for the zoning ordinance subcommittee for when we do try
Right,
to
and
initiate
that's
those
why I'm
changes.
bringing it up. I don't
Yeah.
have a problem with this one. Mm-hmm. I didn't have a real problem with the house behind them. But at that time, the zoning board decided to uphold the ordinance of no fences in the side yard. So, but
I appreciate your historical insight.
Okay.
we need a motion to open the public hearing?
Yep.
I'll make a motion to open the public hearing.
I'll second the motion.
Motion is supported, to open the public hearing. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. The hearing is open. Okay. Questions or
Do we have
anything?
anybody who wants to speak to this?
That's what I said. Well, in the audience, yeah, I guess we forgot that. We went to the comments. Anybody would like to speak to this variance? Step to the microphone, please. Name and address for the record, please.
My name is Christine. There we go. My name is Christine Palazak, and I am at 1619 Owixa Street. I am the homeowner directly across the street from the side yard where the fence has been constructed. I had no problem with the 4-foot see-through fence and its location. It was a good-looking fence. However, when the privacy fence went up, I don't know if you've seen it in person, it looks like giant popsicle sticks joined together, 6 foot high, a yellow golden color. From my front yard, I look out to that fence and it's like, boom, right in my face. I disagree respectfully with you, Tricia, about the fact that aesthetics are not an appropriate point to be considered here. I think as Walker should be a neighbor-friendly ordinance, these should be considered. I don't consider this fence neighbor-friendly. No, the existing homeowner said that they had the support of their adjacent neighbors. Maybe she's speaking to the fact of the neighbor right next door to her, but as a neighbor directly across the street from her lot, my entire property line is in line with their property fence. So the front of my house and my property directly faces the entire length of that fence. Aesthetically, it is not pleasing to me as a property owner at all. And I was never contacted or asked if I would be in favor of such a property fence. So I disagree with the property owner who said that they had the support of adjacent neighbors. I am not one of those neighbors who gave support. I was never contacted. As far as the first exceptional or extraordinary circumstances, there's definitely not a topography issue. I respectfully disagree that a secondary front yard, a side yard, is an exceptional circumstance. I don't believe it is. If they were to fence in their yard equal to the plane of the corner of their house, which would probably push the property fence line about 20 plus feet back from where it is existing right now, it would be much more acceptable, in my opinion. And also, the portion of usable versus unusable property, I believe from looking at your diagrams, the majority of their backyard that would be fenced in, the majority would still be usable, in opposition to the examples you showed where the majority becomes unusable. So I believe they would have a majority usable amount of property in their backyard if this fence were to be pushed back to the plane of their house. The property directly in back of them, as you brought up, Roger, was denied the same permissions. And they did have a fence that they were then asked to move back to the plane of their house. So if you relook at the diagram, the plane of the directly in backyard, the fence, you can see the neighbor's fence line. And if, they had to move it way back to be adjacent to their house, I think that these property owners should be required to do the same. The fence sticks way out into the property, into the area from the sidewalk, and that's, with the solid nature of that fence, that's what makes it an eyesore to me. As I said, when it was a wrought iron fence, the first slide you showed, it seemed perfectly acceptable. It was see-through, it was not obtrusive. But the new fence, and I wish you did have a picture of it that we could view, aesthetically is really not acceptable. Not to myself, not to my neighbors. So I'd like you to reconsider your position, Tricia, about approving all 4 areas to recommend granting this variance. As a property owner directly across the street from this fence, I don't agree respectfully with your assessment, and I would ask you to reconsider. Thank you.
Can I address a few points here? So firstly, we never planned to leave the fence as is, but as most of you know, you cannot stain a fence that is still what they call wet. So you have to go through a drying period before you can go ahead and stain the fence any given color. Secondly, I think that maybe a fairer compromise would be for us to add some landscaping or some decorative items in front of the fence rather than removing the fence if that's the problem, is you don't like the look of it. I'm sorry for that, but there are steps that we can take to make it more attractive. But also, if we are required to move our fence back to meet the plane of our house, then our neighbors will be staring at a gate because there is not clearance on the other side to accommodate an 8-foot gate. So we would have to position that facing the road, aka facing their front yards. So I don't think even within the as-written context of the zoning as it is today, I don't think that would be a prettier view or an improvement. It would just be a few feet back and then a gate included.
My name is David Sutter. I'm at 1625 Awixa. I'm actually directly across from the gentleman that had to move his fence. It was about 13 years ago, I believe. I agree with everything that Chris just said. It is an eyesore to me. I would be okay with a gate on the outside of the fence if it was moved. Another thing I have concern with is the house in question adjacent from that is now for sale. And I'm afraid that when that house gets purchased, that homeowner is going to think that they can just put the fence in line with where their fence is as well. So then you're just going to have a real long fence along the whole road. And the 25 feet, I would be okay with that because it's 14 foot now. That's another 11 feet closer to their house that it would be. So that's all I have to say on that. Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay. Okay, board, I'm gonna turn it over to you for some questions, comments.
I've got a question.
Sure.
So what is the distance exactly from where the fence should be and where it's located now? Like, how far out is it exactly? Because I went and looked at it last night, in the evening. So I'm just wondering, like, visually, what difference would it make if the fence is, in line with the house or where it is now? Like, what is that distance?
It's not a specific distance. It's, the requirement is for it to be in line with the plane of the house.
Right, but what is it now? Like,
How
what
far
its
is the
current
house
location?
from the
Like,
property line?
what's that corner of the fence to the house?
Looks like it's about halfway.
From here to here,
Yeah.
Yeah. It's gotta be about 15 feet,
it's probably about that.
probably about 30 foot. Sidewalk to the house is probably roughly 30 feet. They're back about 14 or 15, and they got another 14 or 15.
So legally, they would have every right to just line it up with the house and just move the fence and have it exactly there and just move that fence.
Right.
But I didn't see that as solving any issue that someone would have with the aesthetics of it, but that's neither here nor there.
Is that where the previous fence was? Are they following the same line, this dotted line?
That's where the wrought iron fence.
Wrought iron open fence was, yeah.
I guess I'm curious, what do the neighbors think about landscaping in front of that fence? Would that break it up for you? If they were to put in trees, bushes, flower beds?
I'm not sure that landscaping would resolve that for me. The issue to me is it seems so far forward and close to the road that when I look out at it from my property, it feels like it's like right in my face, up close. I would think a much better solution would be to move the fence back to the plane of the house.
Again, now you're asking us to spend thousands of dollars for a couple of feet.
Well, I'm sorry, but there were ordinances to be looked at and observed before the fence went in, the privacy fence. It does allow for a 4 foot, I believe, but not for a 6 foot solid fence.
Okay. So do you think if they put the 4 foot in line with the house, that it would be aesthetically better?
Well, the 6 foot can be, as long as it's within the ordinance, that's fine with me. But it took me about 5 minutes to look up what the ordinance is for a fence. It doesn't take long to do that. And I would have
Yeah, I
done
know, I'm just talking about aesthetically, and that's what we're, to looking out the front door or at the house. So if it was a 4 foot fence, privacy fence, less 2 feet, would that back, 15 more feet? Is that what it would allow it, or 12 feet? Huh?
That's what they're guessing.
Guess, I don't know,
Yeah.
15, 12 foot backs, more back, and reduce it from 2 foot down to 4 foot, and still be a privacy fence? You think that would be aesthetically more pleasing? Yes. Looking out your front, I'm just asking a question.
I see what you're
okay?
saying, yeah. I believe so.
Okay.
4 foot considered a privacy fence.
Okay, anyone else? Well, I meant something you can't see through, I guess, by
He's getting
me,
ready.
by privacy. Go ahead, move on.
So I have a few thoughts.
All right,
So, first of all, like Trish said, these corner lots are problematic. As a development, when you get to a corner lot, a lot of times the developer or the city looks at how do we squeeze them corner lots in? My historic situation was usually there's square. Correct? Maybe not. But I'm just, because I'm old, maybe that's what I know. These here seem to be more rectangular, which to me gives us some more latitude. So with that being said, secondarily, I would assume that secondary front yard is a 35-foot minimum front yard setback
For the house, yep.
to the house. So I don't, the dimensional wise, whatever we're throwing around on a table tonight, I'm just throwing that out, 35 foot would be the minimum. If I was a builder, which I think I was, you know, I'd put it at 35 there or 10 over, whatever. So we're at least 35 feet from the 1 foot back from the sidewalk. With this rectangular shape of this lot and the lot owner to the west, correct, Roger? Where we denied something. I think the intent of the ordinance is met for two reasons. One, the vision at the corner is met. There's not a lot in the backyard where if I'm backing out of my driveway, I can't see to back out onto the road safely, whether back out or drive out front ways. So I think the intent of the ordinance is okay here because we have, those things don't affect this particular corner lot. Another corner lot, if we had another residential lot, 90 foot by 135, this could be problematic. We don't have that here. So the house that's for sale, I guess if he came in for a variance to move it to whatever, I think he would have a good argument. So those are some of my thoughts. My other thing is if this was a 4-foot fence, they could do that. They could run that 4-foot fence out within 1 foot from the back of the sidewalk, correct?
Yep.
So, I mean, so I don't care about this walkable community, and, I mean, I do care about it. I mean, let me rephrase that. I care about it, but it's like, come on. So, I guess, let me summarize what I'm trying to say, is all the criteria are met except the cosmetics of it. So I think as a board, we really need to think about that. The criteria are met here to approve this. We're not in a position, I don't think, as a zoning board of appeals to require additional landscaping, additional plants, additional whatever, stain color. Correct me if I'm wrong, Trish. But I think, in my opinion, this works to meet approval.
Randy, you do have the discretion to add appropriate conditions if you needed to.
Okay. I think those are my final thoughts.
Any other board members, anything to say?
Yeah, I've got a question.
Go ahead, Mary.
So you said that this ordinance is under review anyway to change. So what would happen if, say, the request tonight was denied and they had moved their fence, but then the ordinance gets changed and then they can put their fence back to where they wanted it in the first place? That could be a scenario that could happen.
Correct.
So then when is the ordinance going to be reviewed and when would it possibly be changed?
So rewriting an entire zoning ordinance is no easy task, but we are slowly chipping away at it. And I mean, we're probably five months in to the project. I would anticipate we would have the whole thing wrapped up within the next year or so.
And then plus it's gotta go through 2 readings.
It's gotta go through, it's gotta go through planning commission for a recommendation, and then it has to go to the city commission
Yep.
for final approval.
Yep.
But we have representatives from the city commission, zoning board of appeals, and the planning commission on that subcommittee. so that we have representation from all the public bodies. And then we also have a staff working group, which consists of myself, Megan Gorby, who's our code enforcement specialist, Chris Corey from McKenna, he's our planning consultant, and then we also have Jeff Sluggett, our attorney.
Okay, any other comments or questions, additions, thoughts? No? Go ahead, Roger.
Based on not knowing what's going, excuse me, based on what's not knowing what's going to be approved in the new ordinance, how do we know that this will even fit within the ordinance?
Well, if it doesn't and you grant a variance, it's lawful by,
Which
by
then
variance.
which then as soon as the house behind this one sells, which their fence is in disrepair, and I really hate that you have two fences side by side right now, across the back of both lots. There's not room to maintain any of that. He's gonna put in a fence. And this gentleman that lives the next house over is gonna be looking at the same wall, which is in line with what I said before. If you have a lot here that has a side yard and you have a house here facing that way, this guy brings his fence all the way out on his, this guy sits in his living room and he's looking at a fence. You might as well live in the city with a brick wall up next to you. I mean, it's bad enough some of us have to look at junk in our neighbors' yards, but would you like to sit there in your living room and look out and see this board fence? And I can relate to that, but it doesn't make it easy. Which is why I guess we have an ordinance to try to make things applicable for everyone. But surely, based on what people have told us before and what they're telling us tonight, there are certain aesthetics that people don't want to pay for property and then have something changed that is objectionable. So.
Okay. Anybody else?
Just a comment. So when we look at this overall, we need to look at the four criteria. One of the things that we can't look at is the financial, or, correct?
Right.
So I understand that from the applicant's thing, we have to kind of rule that out. So from the neighbors then, none of this refers to the aesthetics. I mean, I've been here for a while. I mean, this is kind of one of the first times or minimal times that I've talked about aesthetics.
Well,
So-
that'd be anything that's detrimental, right?
Well, okay, possibly. Anyway, that's my comment, so, and then Trish, I guess to piggyback on that is, can I pick that I want that fence pink or white or brown or black, or if I did a thing, can I have a pine tree every 6 feet, or can I guess, I mean, I'm getting into something that I don't want to be part of.
We
As far
have-
as the zoning board of appeals.
Yeah, we have standards for fence materials. We also have a standard that relates to, like if you had a wooden fence, the good side must face your neighbor. So all the posts have to be, facing your own property. But in terms of aesthetics, it could be, maybe it's open for interpretation in terms of whether that counts as detriment. When I apply the standard of if the variance is granted, will it pose substantial detriment to adjacent property and materially impair the intent and purposes of this chapter or the public interest? I'm thinking about life safety type things. Is this, so for example, if the fence was proposed in that area where we said should maybe be like a no build zone, if the request was for a fence in that area, then you could probably make the argument that, yeah, that would pose a detriment to public safety, because there wouldn't be clear vision being maintained at that corner. So I'm sure in a lot of different circumstances you could look at aesthetics depending on, you know, the nature of the request in terms of whether or not that would weigh into posing a detriment. In my opinion, here, I don't believe that aesthetics come into play. If it were a fence that was in disrepair, or a fence that was in, you know, made out of a material like chicken wire or something like that would be something where I think you might say, that's not very aesthetically pleasing. But this is just a standard wooden fence.
I think, you know, it's pretty broad when we go over and it says no, on 3 it says no detriment to adjacent properties, so that leaves it wide open. It doesn't mean anything about, doesn't clarify everything, I guess is what I'm saying, okay? I mean, we're not, yeah, clear vision would be appropriate, I'm sure of that. Doesn't hit like the light, air, you know, visibility, or whatever, all the above, okay? There's a lot of areas that could cause detriment, I guess. I don't know, it's kind of wide open.
Well, if the homeowner feels that something adjacent to their property tends to decrease their property value in a sale situation, is that detriment?
Yeah.
Does it
If
have to
if they're
be-
gonna get relief, well, they're gonna get a special, you know, exception or variance for it, yeah, that's not, no, it's not accordingly to the ordinance, that's what we're doing.
I mean, if I was looking to sell and the place across the street was a junkyard, I'm gonna lose money on somebody, a prospective buyer.
No. Everybody's taste is different, or, you know, or whatever they like and don't like to see. I don't understand that.
Well, I don't wanna beat a dead horse, but I guess, are we qualified to make that as a board, to make those decisions, is what that means? I mean, I guess, that's an outright question, I don't know if we are. Secondarily is, I mean, nothing is in that backyard right now, apparently, and I drove by there, and I didn't look over the fence, but there's nothing back there, as far as I can see on what we've been provided. But if there was a pool there, or a patio, or some outdoor stuff, you know, this is just fine to have a privacy fence, is what I'm trying to say. And I think, I gotta go back to Trish's, it meets all the criteria that we're looking at. So I think we need to preserve what they have there as the owner of that property.
I'm not gonna argue with it, I'm just saying, but but all our definitions that we have to go by, until we come up with all these other scenarios, pretty wide open. You know, where it says no detriment to adjacent properties.
Well, what
Who
is it?
determines
So
that?
what's an adjacent property?
Yeah, but-
There we go. Is it the guy right to
Yeah.
the north of them?
Yeah.
To behind them? Is it the guy
Right.
across the street?
Yep.
You guys tell me, I'm just asking a
That's
question.
what I'm saying, that's what we gotta come up with.
Yeah, or is it the guy 3 blocks from there? I mean, I don't know.
Well, it's just like-
Adjacent, to me, is the person next door or behind them.
It's just like you're looking at definition on these examples, usable space versus unusable space. Or is it fenceable versus unfenceable?
Roger, it's fenceable with a privacy fence versus unfenceable. But I named it usable versus unusable so that you get the perspective of what portion of the yard is being used.
And it depends on the individual homeowner, how they want to use their property. Some
Usually
people-
fences are to
Some people
contain,
don't want fences. I have fences
Right.
down 2 sides of my house. No fence from the garage out or the house out. No fence in the back. And I didn't put up either of the side fences. It's like, I chose not to fence my yard in.
You're not a corner lot, though, are you?
No, but I have a vacant lot behind me that the county owns. And everybody in the neighborhood uses it. So. I don't know.
Okay, we mulled it all over, I guess.
We beat this to the end.
We're beating it up pretty good from every angle, so. Where are we going with it? Where are we going with the board? You wanna articulate a motion, or you wanna discuss some more on it? What do you want?
I make a motion to close the public hearing.
All right, support. Motion to close the public hearing, supported. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All same sign, the public hearing is closed. So now I think we beat it up quite a bit. You wanna beat it up some more, or do you wanna do it, somebody ready to make a motion?
Well, I'll make a motion.
Okay,
I'll make a motion to approve the variance based on the criteria that was presented here. I kind of read through those pre-things, Trish. Are they both to deny? Or is that I don't know, anyway. So I guess I'd like to make a motion to support this variance based on the evidence that we have there. But with that saying, I think just on the record, I think the minimum, and for you you guys that are reviewing the ordinances, I'd like to see a minimum of 15 foot. I don't know if that can be part of this motion, or, I mean, that's what I'd like to see, and I don't wanna make these people, if they're 14 feet 2 inches, I don't wanna make them move it 8 inches. But, you know, I think I want it on the record, so if the neighbor to the west wants to move his fence, he can go 15 feet from the property line.
I think that would cause the property owner to have to move the fence about 1 foot.
Okay, then I don't wanna do that, but I guess then I just leave my motion to approve it.
My condition that I added in here was that it be no closer than 12 feet to the property line.
Yeah, I don't like that, but,
The only reason I put 12 feet in there is to allow for a little bit of wiggle room, because we're only measuring from an aerial photo. And if the guy behind her has his property surveyed and wants to line up with that fence, it could actually be a different distance. So I figured 12 feet would give us a little bit of wiggle room. But if you're more comfortable with just saying where it's located, then that would be fine too.
before we go any further, I gotta ask one question before we go any further. When we notice this, hearing or for a variance, how far do we go for notices on adjacent properties? 300
feet.
So that's adjacent property. Somebody just said, because it's across the street, it's not adjacent property, like I ain't touching it.
Okay.
I'm saying it's adjacent properties.
Okay.
By our notice, okay? Just so we make it clear,
okay,
okay?
okay,
All right,
thank you.
all right.
So my motion will be to, approve this request per the applicant and per our criteria for all the four findings that
Okay.
we checked off our list and said they met all the four criteria. That's my motion.
Okay. We have a motion. Do I hear support?
I'll second it.
Second it? Ariel? Okay. Okay, we have a, motion and a support, those conditions, or whatever we feel that supports the variance. Any questions on that, motion before I call for a vote? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign.
Aye.
Okay, so what do we got?
Can I do
Show
a
of
roll
hands.
call?
Yes?
Muriel?
Aye.
Rod?
Opposed? Or you're in favor?
I'm in favor of.
Okay, favor, okay.
Roger?
No.
Brian?
No.
Bob?
I don't want to vote until the rest of them, unless you need my vote. I'm not supposed to.
Okay. Randy?
Yes.
Pat?
No.
Tom?
Aye.
Okay.
Now how you feel?
Bob?
Huh?
Now how do you feel, Bob?
No, I will. Well, I'm supposed to be the tiebreaker, okay, so
That's what it is. Is
Okay.
it 3-3?
I say no.
Bob says no.
Only because of the phrase of the detriment to adjacent properties. That's where I have a little problem right at the moment. Other than that, I think I made all the rest of the criterias other than that. And what we determined to be adjacent properties, I don't think that means touching it, you know, by notice what we're seeing under our own restrictions, even if it's zoning or if it's what we're doing, that's, hey, we have a certain amount of feet we notify. So I'm thinking those are adjacent properties by that nature, that's why I'm saying that, okay?
That's your final?
Yeah,
Right, okay.
I'm opposed.
Okay.
Motion is denied by a vote of 3 ayes to 4 noes.
How many ayes?
3 ayes, 4
So
noes.
it's a tie?
No, you just cast the
I broke it?
deciding vote to deny it.
Vote deny it,
Okay.
for that reason I stated.
The applicant's not here to sign?
No, she's in the computer. Lisa, I can mail you the decision and order.
All right.
All right. Okay, next applicant.
You guys have thought this through well.
Okay,
Back to the ordinance committee.
Mr. Toby, present, okay. All right, 1426 Marlin Avenue Northwest, single-family residential zoned, 0.25 acres. Type of request, variance. Applicant is requesting relief from a section of 94-470B1 and 94-470BX5 of the Walker Zoning Ordinance to allow for a temporary residence in a travel trailer in the front yard of a residential lot. Okay, to allow a RV to be parked in the driveway within the required front yard to allow the applicant's brother to temporarily reside in the RV in the driveway. Applicant has provided the following findings for his request. That there are exceptional or extraordinary circumstances for this piece of property. Temporary park and sleep in our travel trailer and my brother's driveway. B, such a variance is necessary for the preservation and enjoyment of the substantial property rights. Applicant's response, we have talked to the neighbors on each side of and across the street about why we are here. They do not have a problem with it. C, the condition or situation of the piece of property is not in such an intended use of such a property use for the variance is sought, such a general nature that it should be material to make a reasonable practicable formulation regarding the regulation. Applicant's response, just here as long as my mother is in need of our assistance. Trish, anything you'd like to add?
Yep. So again, for the record, this is 1426 Marlin, and they are asking for relief from section 94-470B, which prohibits parking an RV within the driveway, which is in the required front yard, and 94-470B5, which prohibits persons from living in an RV or on a residential lot. So I provided this graphic that is from our zoning ordinance that shows lawful places for lots that are less than 1 acre for storage of RVs. So one of the areas is on the garage side, behind the front plane of the house, no greater than 16 foot long. If you have an RV that's longer than 16 feet, you can place it back here behind the garage in the rear yard. And in no case can you have more than 2 RVs. So just a little bit about the property itself. It's within the A single-family residential zoning district. The lot is 0.25 acres, which is 10,865 square feet, making it just a little bit smaller than your current lot size of 11,880 square feet. The existing home was built in 1955, and it's located in the Leonard Gardens Home Sites plat. And this property was the subject of some recent enforcement action that was initiated in June of this year, where our code enforcement specialist received a complaint of somebody living in an RV in the driveway of the subject site. So existing conditions, this is a photo that was taken by Ms. Gorby in her report for her letter that she sent to the applicant to inform of the zoning ordinance violations. And so when there's zoning ordinance violations and you receive a letter, due process allows you to appeal the determination of the code enforcement specialist, or you can request a variance from the letter of the ordinance to allow for the use to take place on the property. And so the applicant is requesting for a variance from those 2 standards that I just mentioned, so that they can keep the camper in the driveway and allow Mr. Spencer's brother to reside in there temporarily. So the site plan that I created for the applicant shows the location where the truck and camper are currently parked. And then over here shows an acceptable location to store the RV, but not use it as a dwelling. There's kind of a tight space between this side of the house and this property line, making it probably a tight squeeze to store anything right here. And there looks to be quite a bit of vegetation over here. You know, so getting an RV back here, I don't know exactly how you would do it, but the purpose of me showing this site plan is to just provide where an acceptable location would be and where an unacceptable location is per the ordinance. So the criteria, I'm going to go through these as it relates to the request. So the exceptional or extraordinary circumstances, does the property itself have exceptional or extraordinary circumstances such as challenging topography, odd shape, etc., not exhibited by other properties in the general vicinity? Is that something that would cause the applicant to not meet the letter of the ordinance? Preservation of rights. So are there other properties within the same zoning district and the same vicinity that are able to enjoy an RV as a dwelling unit in their front yard? And will the applicant be denied a substantial property right if the variance is not granted? And not a detriment. So if this use is allowed, will it have a negative impact on neighboring properties? And then not a general problem. Does this type of request exist often enough for us to take a look at whether or not we should make a change in the zoning ordinance? So looking at the first one, so are there exceptional or extraordinary circumstances to not living in the RV? It's a situation that's kind of self-created. And so if we're looking at just the location of where the RV is being stored, we could look at the fact that the lot is substandard. So it's smaller than the current standard for today for a lot in that zoning district. But would it prevent the applicant from storing the RV in the rear yard? I think there's plenty of space, but the question is, how would you get it back there? And then, you know, I think that the lack of reasonable accommodations would not prevent the applicant from complying with the ordinance. Because I feel like there are different options for the applicant's brother in terms of where to stay when he's in town caring for their mother. Is that correct? My mother, yes. Yep, okay. So just doing a quick Google search, I came up with 5 different campgrounds that were within pretty close proximity to the Walker area. So because of that, you know, I really don't think there's anything extraordinary here that would prevent the applicant from complying with the zoning ordinance in terms of the property itself. When we look at preservation of property rights, this isn't something that we see in the city unless it's happening under the radar. If it is happening, we get a call, and then Ms. Gorby goes out to do enforcement, sends a letter, and like I said earlier, you either comply or you go through your due process and you appeal. So we haven't, as far as I could find out, as far as I could tell from the city's records, we have not granted a variance for a use like this. And the city doesn't allow this use in any other circumstances. So not granting the variance would not deprive the property owner of a significant property right enjoyed by others in the same general vicinity. So if we had a lot of people who were staying in campers, because they either had a variance or for some other allowance, that would be one thing, but in this circumstance, we just don't have it. So I don't believe that criterion has been met. So no substantial detriment. So In this case, we're not talking as much about aesthetics as we could be, as we are some other factors that come along with living in a camper. So I don't have enough information to know whether the facilities within the camper are being used or if the applicant's brother is going into the house to use facilities. I hate to put all your personal information out there like that. But, you know, if this variance was granted, like let's say the applicant's brother is doing all the right things and appropriately taking care of any waste and, you know, using the facilities inside the camper. If we set a precedent by granting the variance, we could have some unintended consequences with others not being so careful with that kind of thing. I've seen people just kind of having a free conduit out to the yard in some circumstances. Not here in Walker, but so we don't want to have that because that would pose you know, a health risk to neighboring property owners. So I just don't think that we can say that it's not a detriment. And not a general problem. This request I don't think has ever been asked, so not in my time here. So this isn't one where I would say we should probably amend the zoning ordinance. So based on these factors, I am recommending that the Zoning Board of Appeals deny the request to temporarily reside in a camper within the required front yard at 1426 Marlin, based on the findings you see here that I just went through.
Okay. Anything the applicant would like to add at this time? Step forward to the microphone, please. State your name and address for the record, please.
Toby Spencer, 1426 Marlin. So my mother took a fall back in March 30th to be exact, and broke her femur. She's 79 years old. This put her in the hospital and then eventually into a rehab facility where she's currently staying and getting rehabbed out at Porter Hills. My brother and his wife have come up to help support me in taking care of mother. And because I have limited space in my house, you know, I have a roommate, so he's in one room, I'm in another room. I'm a work from home employee, so my third bedroom is my office. He brought his trailer, and he has been sleeping in that trailer.
Not living in it.
Yeah, not living in it. They come in the house during the day, of course. So we're not looking for a change to the variance, we're just looking for a temporary exception. You know, we're not looking for